As Pittsburgh Steelers training camp approaches, we talk about here on the Locked On Steelers podcast about the big matchup that everyone wants to see round two of, and that's Joey Porter Jr. versus George Pickens. How have the two grown? How will the two match up? And what will happen this time around? I talk about that with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook is the number one sportsbook in America. Make every moment more. Right now, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day, all summer long. That's right. There's something new for everyone, existing and new customers, all day, every day. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. As I said before, we're joined by the man himself, Alan Saunders. He's back from SteelersNow.com. He was on vacation. Now he's off. We're all sad because we have to go back to work for real. But we are both all excited because training camp is going to be here. In fact, this is the Tuesday episode for tomorrow. Tomorrow, the players report, and you and I will be back in Latrobe.
I'm ready, man. I'm fired up. I'm ready to go. I'm excited.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about some real football. I feel like it's been we were very spoiled early this offseason because we went from when the season ended, January 16th to about May, I guess even into June, where something was happening every day.
Yep.
The last couple of weeks have been a little skimpy.
It's been a drag. For your information, Alan, I did not talk about Brandon Ayuk last week, so people were like, "Oh, Chris has got to do a Brandon Ayuk episode." I said, "Joke's on you! I already recorded the entire week." So there that was. But I wanted to talk to you about a big matchup that's going to happen in training camp that I think everyone is going to be turning and looking for when we're at Latrobe at St. Vincent College, because it's going to be crazy to see Joey Porter Jr. and George Pickens get matched up again. Last year, George Pickens got the best of Joey quite a few times, including there was a highlight catch that people posted all over social media where Pickens dropped the ball in front of Joey Porter. They were a bit of a rivalry, and George got the upper hand on him. But now things are a little bit different this year. While George entered his third year, Joey's entering his second year, and both are guys that the Steelers themselves are hoping can be among the best of their positions in the league. Alan, before we hear from you, I wanted to go back to a question that you asked Joey Porter Jr. Back during minicamp about that matchup and them rekindling that rivalry in training camp. Here was what Joey Porter Jr. had to say about them getting to go up against each other again.
Last offseason, we talked a lot about you kind of going up against George and a bunch of one-on-one battles. Is it the same the second year? Is it a little bit different? How does that,
Oh, yeah, it's the same. It's the same. We gunning for each other every day. We get a chance to. And, I'm looking forward for training camp. I know it's going to be spicy, so I'm ready for it.
So there you have it. Joey Porter Jr. talking there about the matchup. Alan, where do you think that Joey can maybe do better in this matchup? Because it seems like George just had a lot of advantages over him, and now this is an opportunity for him to kind of show, oh no, he's the one that's been able to grow in the NFL.
I was very interested to see what Joey was going to say when I asked him about this, because, it was a measuring stick for him when he was a rookie, right? Like, George was an established guy. He'd been there, done that. He'd already had a lot of success in the NFL level. So it was very natural for him to be like, all right, I want that guy. I want to go get him. And, it didn't go that well for him last year. I mean, I think he got his. There's no question, but I think George was the better of the two. But then, I think we all saw the development of Joey Porter Jr., the player, over the course of the 2023 season. You think about how much better he was at the end of the season than he was at the beginning of the season, let alone training camp. And now I think, man, these could be guys coming in on this maybe not quite equal footing, because George is still a more experienced player, and I think player with a little bit longer track record of success, but I think something a lot more approaching equal footing. So I was interested to see, what was he going to say? Was he going to be like, nah, I'm not worried about that anymore. I'm a been there, done that guy now. I don't need to prove myself against anybody. No, he was like, yes, I want him again. I'm ready for it. I mean, this was before minicamp was even over, and he was looking forward to those kind of battles. And so I think that just goes a long way to show the kind of competitor he is, the kind of person and player that he is. And I really think it's an interesting kind of two-way battle now, because on one hand, sure, like, yeah, Joey's going to get some tough assignments. He got some tougher assignments than George Pickens, arguably, down the stretch of the 2023 season. He's going to continue to get those tough assignments. He's going to need to handle the best receivers in the league, and George is certainly a great guy, to hone himself against every day. But on the other hand, I think George Pickens is going to be very interested in how teams are going to try to defend him in this new offense. Everybody has a plan, and they've been rolling out the new installation of this offense throughout the spring and the early part of the summer through OTAs and minicamp. And that, I think the players on the offense start to have a pretty good feel for what the offense is trying to do. And as Mike Tyson will tell you, what you're trying to do doesn't last very long all the time in competition. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see, how much better is Joey Porter than he was a year ago? Is he able to handle one-on-one against George Pickens? But also, how is the Steelers defense, and by extension Joey Porter, going to defend George Pickens in a very different offense with different people around him? He's the guy now. Joey Porter isn't the only one that's going to be following George Pickens around. Every single top corner on every team is probably going to follow him all year. And I think there's some stakes in this battle this year beyond the typical third-year guy versus second-year guy at training camp.
I agree with the stakes part, because that to me is a big part of this. Remember, I asked Terrell Austin about this back in training camp too, just asking hey, Joey Porter says he wants to follow number one receivers every week. Is that something that you guys are prepared to do? And he was he kind of laughed it off, hey, we'll see. That's all about matchups. We'll decide that. But if Joey Porter Jr. wants to be that guy who follows the number one receiver on every single team, he got to be able to not just run with, but win most of those matchups against George Pickens. Because if he does that, then it's okay, can you do that with Jamar Chase? Can you do that with if the Steelers go up against a Justin Jefferson, with Drake London on week 1, those are going to be some major matchups that if Joey Porter Jr., if he gets the best of George Pickens in training camp, that's a sign there. But also at the same time, if both of them just play at a very high level, and the old phrase iron sharpens iron, and that both of these guys make each other better, and both of them are, let's say, top 10 at their position in the NFL, that becomes an advantage the Steelers have in a lot of matchups, and could be a major factor that swings their way in some key matchups this season.
Yeah, and I think there's both of these guys still have to show as NFL players too. Joey Porter wasn't that great in all zone coverage last year. There were mistakes. There's growth, and George Pickens is going to be asked to do a lot more now without Deontay Johnson. He can't just be the deep ball guy. He's got to show off more of the route tree. So I think there's a lot of growth potential still in these two young guys, even though they've got some NFL experience under their belt, that I think they're going to be eager to show off against one another.
Absolutely. We'll talk more about other matchups here, but I want to get to other Steelers receivers, because Calvin Austin got some praise from Russell Wilson. We'll talk about what was said there and how that impacts everything heading into training camp. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, we'll remind you this show is also brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats these days and might not have the time to resources to hire. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, Calvin Austin recently took to the radio on ESPN in Memphis and talked about him getting to work out with Russell Wilson during the offseason. And there were some cool photos and videos and stuff posted online of their working out. But this was an interesting quote that Calvin had about from Russell Wilson, talking about their interactions and what he felt he learned from them. Calvin Austin was quoted on the show as saying, quote, "He was just saying," that being Russell Wilson, "I kind of reminded him of Tyler Lockett in some ways. He was like, 'You're extremely fast.'" And he was like, "Man, I didn't know you were that fast." And that was kind of an interesting point there, where I think that was an interesting a comparison to be made there. And when you look at how Calvin Austin has played so far in the NFL, everyone sees the speed, everyone sees that he can get loose, but he did have a ways to go. But you and I, we talked about this after OTAs and minicamp. We talked to Zach Azzani, the Steelers wide receivers coach, who had a lot of praise for Calvin Austin and the work that he was putting in, and the technique that he was getting done, the footwork that he was showing. You get Tyler Lockett. I mean, that's pretty high praise. That's a long established NFL veteran who's been very good at his job for a very long time. But is that something you think is actually attainable for Calvin Austin if he sticks with it?
Well, I mean, I think it's two different things. Like physically, I think Calvin Austin's faster than Tyler Lockett.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he ran a 4.32 40.
Yeah.
Certainly faster than Lockett, and I think he's more explosive too. Like I mean, I think Tyler Lockett is a more polished receiver, a more polished route runner. He's thicker. He's a couple inches taller, but I think maybe more importantly, he just seems like a guy who is like a little bit more physically capable of handling the physical punishment required to go inside. And so often, if you're not tall, if you're not that big George Pickens guy, you have to go inside to get those free releases. So you don't get, stiff-armed and jammed at the line into oblivion. You get those free releases on the inside. We've seen Calvin Austin do some of that. I think probably not as much as people had hoped. Arthur Smith loves to use the middle of the field. I'll say the other thing is he loves to use little guys in non-strictly slot roles. I think it's interesting. Tyler Lockett is, to me, that kind of classic slot receiver. I think Calvin Austin may have a different role for this team where, you can use different ways to get those guys free release. You can use motion. You can use bunches. You can use shifts and different kinds of formations. You can put them in the backfield. And to get those free releases and then let him work the middle of the field. This is like a really interesting part of this offense because Arthur Smith really likes to throw the middle field, but Russell Wilson has historically not done so well in the middle of the field. So something's going to have to give there, but I do think Calvin Austin could be a big part of their plan. I thought he was awesome in the spring. And I think if there's a player, like I appreciate the comparison. I think it's a maybe a little physically, sure, in terms of like just the pure speed, but like, if there's a player with some connections to this offense that I think maybe Calvin Austin could fit a little bit better, how about Khalif Raymond in those Tennessee Titans years in that Arthur Smith offense? I think that maybe could be a little bit more of what you can expect from Calvin Austin this season.
I think it's going to be very interesting to see how he's worked into things because you look at his size and there's concerns. Okay, could he keep up with the physicality of what's going to be asked him if you line him up on the outside? But if you moved him around the offense, and I think that's something that could absolutely happen here. Another thing to think about here, Alan, is everyone's talking about the number 2 wide receiver, and you need a guy that can line up on the outside. What if the number 2 wide receiver is mostly lining up in the slot, and the outside guy is more so just he's kind of the third leading receiver if we're talking about wide receiver as far as targets. But the second guy is the slot guy, and that's where Calvin Austin is kind of being used as like hey, we're going to move him all over the field and kind of force you to have to think about where he is. Because also we're also thinking of the fact here, Pat Fryermuth's going to be worked into this equation somehow. You're going to be throwing the running backs out of the backfield. So there's going to be a mixing up. It's not like it's going to be exclusively Calvin Austin there. And of course, Roman Wilson has to play a factor into this. They drafted him in the 3rd round for a reason this year. But I could potentially see an offense where the slot receiver becomes kind of the next target or next most productive wide receiver behind George Pickens in the Steelers offense. And if Calvin Austin fits in that role, I think that could be a place where he excels.
Yeah, I think it's almost like two different things, right? Like who's the number 2 and number 3 receiver isn't necessarily who plays in the slot. And look, I think Darnell Washington and Jaylen Warren are probably going to play more than any receiver other than George Pickens this year. I think like if you get it late into a game and you're trailing by 2 touchdowns and you just got to go very traditional, one shotgun, sidecar, 2 guys out there, guy in the slot. I think that's a great, that's probably more like a Roman Wilson vibe for me, right? But like if you can get into some bunches, you're running some play action, you're doing some early down stuff, you're doing a lot of motion, you're doing some shifts, and you're getting guys free releases, then I think Calvin Austin can be that wide receiver 2. I'm using some air quotes here.
Yeah,
and in a different kind of role than we've traditionally seen that second wide receiver take. Yeah, absolutely. I thought he was the second best receiver on the field all spring. So if he continues to be that, I think this offense has enough flexibility that they don't need to force feed a specific body type to play opposite George Pickens. If Calvin Austin is the next best guy, then he's going to play the next most. And if Roman Wilson is the next most, then he's going to play the next most. If it's Van Jefferson, then it's going to be him. I think they can figure it out a number of different ways.
I think that's I'm right with you here. There's a lot of different configurations that can go here, but that's the other fun part of training camp is we're going to get to see all these different guys. Like, we've talked about how quarterback's pretty much like the pole position is what it's going to be, but wide receiver, I think, is very much up in the air. I think that they're going to, Calvin Austin is going to be the veteran that kind of gets the first lean there. But I think that if Roman Wilson steps up, they have not been afraid to put rookie receivers out there to get their experience, and I think that's another camp battle that's going to be interesting as far as how Calvin Austin fends off the other guys that they've added to the wide receiver room, because to me it's going to be it's going to be something that can be really strong if the Steelers get just even a little bit of production from those second and third options in the wide receiver room to kind of balance out the offense. Because again, like we've talked about, this offense isn't going to be, if this offense takes a major jump, it's not because the offense, that the passing part of it went from bottom of the league to top 10 in the league. It's going to be because it ran the ball well, it played off the run well, and it balanced itself well. And then, with those types of offenses, usually there's only one guy, sometimes 2 if you're lucky, that do well in the as far as the receiving numbers, and then it can be a smattering of guys beneath there. But if Calvin Austin is a cog in that machine, I think that could be a very, very strong thing that happens there.
And I will say this, I don't think a lot of people are talking about Quez Watkins, but he's a great deep ball runner. And if you're trying to line up the skill sets, that's probably Russell Wilson's best thing. I'm very curious to see, I was talking about, you can look at the traits of the offense and you can look at the traits of the quarterback, and they're different. So how's it going to work? Is it going to look more like Arthur Smith, or is it going to look more like Russell Wilson? Because if it looks more like Russell Wilson, I think I want Quez running under those moonshot deep balls. I think there's a lot of different ways this could turn out. It's probably the position that I see the most uncertainty about going into training camp.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions there. But the other position we're talking about that's very much up in the air is slot cornerback, especially with the suspension of Cam Sutton, which, again, we knew was coming. But I want to talk to you, Alan, about where that stands and what we'll be watching for early on in that training camp battle. All that here and more on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Chris Carter, Alan Saunders, stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. When you love sports so much, you miss it when some of the action slows down, and it does a little bit in the summer because you're kind of restricted to the ML, Major League Baseball, and the WNBA. But that doesn't mean that you should be restricted in your chance to make money off of all of that action. Because guess what? If you go to FanDuel right now, FanDuel.com, or download the app right to your phone, you can play on FanDuel Sportsbook all summer long. And all summer long, all customers, that's new customers and returning customers, get a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com today, FanDuel.com, and you can start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sportsbook betting partner of Major League Baseball. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're here with Alan Saunders. Alan, let's get on the slot cornerback conversation here, because Cam Sutton, again, we knew that he was going to get suspended. So the question was always still going to be there, who was going to end up being the slot cornerback to start most of the season. And one thing that our guy Jim Wexel, we had him on last week, he recently brought up that while it won't be an exclusive job for them, he feels like Deshaun Elliott might be a de facto help in this realm here. Who do you see being the guy that when we look at through the first 8 weeks of the season when Cam Sutton's suspended, who gets the most slot cornerback snaps of those times when it's all said and done?
Yeah, we did this on my podcast yesterday. I had to name my starters right now, and I copped out and just went with the base defense because it's a lot easier than picking a starter at slot. But I think Wex is onto something, man. If you made me pick a starting offense right now that's in a nickel alignment, give me 3 safeties on the field and give me Deshaun Elliott in the box. Yeah, I think that's an absolute possibility for this team. I think they've wanted to use that 3 safety alignment a lot more than they have over the last couple of years. They finally have those guys healthy. I think KZ, if you look like I don't think it's really much of an argument. After the first 4 starters, DeMonte KZ is their next best defensive back. Like I don't even know, like nobody else is even close. And so like, yeah, why wouldn't you use him as much as you can? Now, you're not going to want to use him in every scenario, but especially like early downs, teams that run the ball a lot, teams with big blocking style tight ends, Baltimore, like all these are places that I think that alignment is going to be used a lot. I do think there will certainly be like a slot corner that plays, against teams that maybe have more traditional alignments like Cincinnati, where they employ like a full-time slot receiver. You're going to want another corner there. That's where the real battle is here. I like Beanie Bishop a lot, man. I don't know if he can do it. It's a long fight for an undrafted free agent to snag essentially like kind of a starting role right out of training camp. I just love his experience. He's played a lot. He's moving from the outside to the inside, but he's got great quickness, great recovery speed, and obviously has a knack for getting his hands on the football with those NCAA leading pass breakups last year with West Virginia. I really think, to me, that like he's the guy they should want to win it. Obviously, there's some guys there with some more experience, guys like Braylon Arnold and Josiah Scott. But I think Beanie Bishop has the tools, man. I think he's a fun player. He's the one I'm really excited to watch. And if I had to pick a favorite to come out of that group of guys, I think I'd go with Beanie.
So that's going to be the interesting battle here because Beanie Bishop, like you said, I agree. It would be ideal if the rookie came up and he played at the level that people thought he could. This was a guy that was getting a lot of attention during college football last year. But I think it's also important to kind of balance yourself with a bit of realism. Like everyone, like, well, Mike Hilton did it, so he can do it. Like, well, listen, what Mike Hilton did in that year's training camp, not too many young cornerbacks just come in and play the way that he did. There's a reason that, not every undrafted guy comes in and just dominates. Mike Hilton made a very strong impression when he came to the Steelers, and that was how he kind of got his way in as their slot cornerback for several years. And that's not to say that Beanie Bishop can't do it, but it's kind of like, let's see this stuff actually play out before it happens, before you start to bank on something like that happening. But I do feel you. I think that Beanie Bishop has the potential there. There's other guys like Josiah Scott who could win this because of his veteran experience. He's played a bunch in the NFL. But again, Deshaun Elliott, is he the option there? Does Ryan Watts get rotated in to help with that deep safety rotation? Because remember, part of the issue was like last year they were excited about their safeties, getting some experience, but then they all got hurt. And then they were down to, Miles Killebrew playing safety in some of those games and Patrick Peterson having to rotate back there. And I'm sure they don't want to get back to that point. But I think this could be an all hands on deck type of situation for the slot cornerback position. I'll be very intrigued to see when they do their first, 7 shots, who gets to line up at slot corner? Who do they put out there to run around with those guys when they go into those formations? That will be the thing that I think everyone should have an eye on if you're very interested in how this position battle shakes out.
And don't forget, Cam Sutton's going to be out there too. Like he's suspended, but his suspension doesn't start until the end of until the end of the preseason. So they're not only going to have this battle, they're also going to have to find a way to get reps for everybody too. I'm sure they're going to want Cam Sutton to get a lot of work so that he is ready to go when that suspension ends coming out of the bye. But they also got to figure out what they have in these other guys, it's going to be pretty difficult. I'm going to be interested to see how Terrell Austin and that defensive staff figures this out, because like you said, like I'm really interested to see who's going to be the first one out there, but maybe it's just going to be Cam Sutton, and then we're still not going to know what's like. You got to figure it out eventually. I do like, and they have a lot of choices, so I think there are certainly a lot of different options and a lot of ways they can go. And hey, still not out of the question they could bring somebody in too. This time last year there was no Quan Alexander, there was no Thompson, there was, so it's not out of the question that they could still bring somebody else in from the outside as well.
Yeah, and we've talked about that too. Like, there's guys out there, even former Steelers, who are still sitting there, like Shannon Sullivan and Patrick Peterson, who, if all else fails, they could go grab a guy like, hey, the system, just come in real quick and hold it down here while we look for answers. But I do think the Steelers are in a good position to kind of figure this out. You got still all a training camp ahead of you. And I do think it's going to be interesting to see, how, who gets the first crack at it. If it is Cam Sutton, who gets the second crack at it behind him, because then we'll at least see which direction they're leaning as far as what they're doing. And again, where does Deshaun Elliott line up in all of this? Because part of what Deshaun Elliott does is he covers well, but he hits well. He plays the run well. And that's surely something the Steelers want to happen with a slot corner as how they've played in recent years. So I'm going to be intrigued to see how they use these guys, how the different positions play into it. And then if there's a designated nickelback, slot cornerback, whatever you want to call him, is that the guy who takes that position most of the time, or is there a rotational answer for that to keep that position fresh, or just to get different matchups? Because that's another part of this. Terrell Austin talk about matchups for Joey Porter Jr. What if it's a simple matter of, this week it's a smaller, quicker guy in the slot, so you want the smaller, quicker corner out there. This week it's a bigger, taller guy in the slot, so maybe you want Deshaun Elliott on him. That could also be part of the plan here, is just have a rotating set of guys for different situations.
Yeah, if there's some teams with some big slots, like the Jujus of the world, I could see a guy like Darius Rush, throw him in that mix too. Like, not as like a full-time slot guy, and he was the dime corner for a little bit last year, but like for a matchup purpose, absolutely put him in there.
Absolutely. There'll be a lot of things to cover here on the Locked On Steelers podcast as training camp players report Wednesday. That's tomorrow if you're listening to the show as it airs on Tuesday. Thanks so much, Alan, for joining us. Alan, the people can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
At @Saunders_PGH on X, Instagram, and TikTok. At PGH Steelers Now sites account, and you can find all my written work at SteelersNow.com, and my podcast, Steelers Afternoon Drive, with Zachary Smith, Monday through Friday on YouTube or anywhere you find podcasts.
Absolutely. Do check out Alan Saunders, all the great work they do at SteelersNow.com. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, you can find my work you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. You can find my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette, for the website there, and find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube, breaking down your Pittsburgh Steelers. We'll see you here again tomorrow as we get you ready as the Steelers report to training camp Wednesday. We have Mike DeFabo from The Athletic giving you all the insights as we get ready for that. We'll see you then here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.